world is veiled in darkness. The wind stops, the sea is wild, and the earth begins to rot. The people wait, their only hope a prophecy. When the world is in darkness, four warriors will come. After a long journey, four young warriors arrive, each holding an orb. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Let's Play Final Fantasy for the NES. First thing we're going to do, turn the respond rate up to 6. That affects the messages in battle, how fast they are. Goes up to 8. 8 makes some messages blurringly fast. 6 is a nice, decent speed. So let's start a new game and let's get talking. Now, if you're interested in jumping straight to the action of getting into the game, I recommend skipping this video. This first one's going to be a basic tutorial on all 6 classes of the game, their strengths and weaknesses, what you can expect from each of them, how they contribute to the party, and not only in the first half of the game, but in the second half after their class upgrades as well. So with that, let's start with the fighter. He's your basic tank character. He's the guy you want in the top slot. Unlike later Final Fantasies, which had front rows and back rows, where you could put, say, your spellcasters on the back row, which would reduce damage from half, this game was before all of that. The way this game works is you have 4 characters in the party. The person in the top slot is targeted 50% of the time. The person in the second slot is targeted 25% of the time. And then the other 2 characters are each targeted 12.5% of the time. So having a fighter in the top slot will make him absorb the most amount of hits from the enemies, and since he has the best selection of weapons and armor, he's the best character to fill out this role. He can use the most weapons of any class as well as the most armor. He's expensive, as you need to basically upgrade his equipment at every new town to keep him going. But as long as you have the money to keep him upgraded, he's pretty much an unstoppable juggernaut. And if you ever run into a horrible situation and you end up with only one team member still alive, you can bet your life it's going to be the fighter. Later on in the game, the fighter upgrades to the Knight class, which opens up his weapons and armor to the vast majority of what remains for the rest of the game. There's only a couple pieces of armor and weapons he cannot use. Upgrading to the Knight also gives him access to the first 3 levels of white magic in the game. However, this usefulness is pretty questionable, as by the time you get the class upgrade, those low levels of white magic aren't going to be very useful. The only thing you'd really be useful for is using low-level cure spells, so you can keep your red mages and white mages from burning their low-level charges. Next is the black belt. You can see in the bottom left there. My personal favorite class of the original game here, for a couple reasons. One, they're the cheapest class to maintain. In fact, you're only going to equip them with 2 different weapons up until level 10, and then after that, for the rest of the game, they do not have a single piece of equipment on them. Giving them weapons actually reduces their attack later on, and equipping them actually lowers their defense and evasion. Until level 10, you'll be using either wooden or iron nunchucks, and after level 10, you will be using bare fist. I'll explain why level 10 is so important for that once we actually get into the game. But after that, while the the black belt, later releases of Final Fantasy 1 renamed the black belt the monk, so you'll probably catch me making that mistake more than once during this playthrough. But the black belt is pretty average to start with. Obviously, he has no armor, so his defense isn't the greatest up until, again, level 10. And it sadly gets better after that. Eventually, even though he has no weapons and no armor, he eventually becomes the strongest class in the game, which is a big reward for having the patience to nurture him and build him up through the first half of the game. If you play your cards right, a team of black belts at the end of the game, you can kill the final boss in a single round of combat. Aside from his fantastic attack power, he only has marginally decent defense and the worst magic defense in the game. So enemies that use a lot of magic are going to be the black belt's biggest problem. And his upgraded class later on in the game is the Master, and he doesn't gain any immediate benefits from the class upgrade aside from a shiny new sprite. However, after the upgrade, the black belt's agility and hit point growth increases significantly. Next, we'll talk about the Thief there in the top right. Frankly, he's the worst class in the game for the first half of the grade. For the first half of the game, excuse me. He's basically a poor man's fighter. He can use almost as many weapons and has a decent selection of armor, but certainly not the best. The Thief has extremely high agility, the best in the game, as you might expect, which makes escaping combat pretty much a guarantee with a Thief in the party. His luck stat is also high, which will have various effects throughout the game, including critical hit bonus as well. However, the Thief's weapon selection eventually falls to the wayside, so he eventually just becomes a very, very mediocre fighter. However, his class upgrade, when he upgrades to the Ninja for the second half of the game, is pretty much the biggest and most dramatic upgrade in the game, and I would argue that the Ninja is overall the best class in the game. Going to the Ninja not only increases his hit point and agility and attack growth, but he also gains access to every single black magic spell from level 1 to 4, including access to Fast, which, casting it on himself, pretty much makes him the most soul-sufficient character in the game. He basically starts off terrible, but he becomes a beast in the end of the game. And again, this is a character that really rewards you for taking him through the first half, giving him some tender love and care, and taking him through to the end game. You won't be disappointed if you include him in your party, as long as you can get through the first half. And aside from that, those are the three melee classes, so we're going to talk about the magic classes next. We will start with the White Mage, which is the main healer of the game, and who later upgrades to the White Wizard. The White Mage and White Wizard has access to all white spells in the game, as you might imagine. They have very poor attack and the second worst defense in the game. However, they have a ton of healing spells that protect against the various elements, fire, ice, electricity, and instant death. They also have harm spells, which are excellent against undead enemies. And they also eventually learn the second strongest attack spell in the game, which is Fade, or Holy, as it was in the original Japanese version. Fade is the renaming of it over here, as Nintendo refused anything even remotely religious in reference in their games back then, so they renamed Holy to Fade. They did other things like rename Death to Rub, and we'll get into some more of that later. But they eventually get access to Fade, which is the second strongest attack spell. White mages also get access to resurrection spells, as well as teleporting spells to traverse dungeon floors more easily, and as well as escape in dungeons entirely. They are, I would call them, fairly essential in this particular version of the game. Later versions of Final Fantasy I, like the Origins remake on PS1, Dawn of Souls on the Game Boy Advance, and the PSP 15th Anniversary remake, really reduced the difficulty level of this game by switching from the spell charge system to a regular magic point system, which I'll get into right after we start the game when I can actually show you. Those versions of the game you can easily get through without a white mage, but in this version, it's considerably more difficult. I would definitely recommend taking a white mage, at least until you've played through the game at least once, and gotten used to enemies and tactics and whatnot. Moving on right after that, you have the opposite of the white mage is the black mage, which later upgrades to the black wizard. Now, they have the worst hit points and the worst defensive growth in the game, but they do eventually have access to all black magic spells, including Nuke, which is the best spell in the game, the most powerful attack, as well as several instant death spells later. Now, the black mage is the best grinding character in the game, as many of his elemental spells will hit entire groups of enemies and can eventually get to the point where you can take out an entire group of enemies with a single spell. When you're grinding for experience and gold, the Black Mage is going to be invaluable. But aside from that, he's sadly not that exciting. He's your typical glass cannon. He can do all kinds of awesome stuff and can hit hard, but he can't take a hit at all. You'll end up in situations where if there's going to be one dead person in your group, you can pretty much bet it's the Black Mage. And finally, the last spellcaster and the last class in the game is the Red Mage. Now, the Red Mage is a hybrid of not only the White Mage and the Black Mage, but I would argue a fighter as well. He has very good attack for the beginning of the game. His attack rating is better than the Thief's. He has access to better armor and weapons than the Thief. And he gets access to, not all, but several white magic spells and several black magic spells. Later on, when he upgrades to the Red Wizard class, his selection increases for the lower level spells. However, he's only ever able to learn one level 7 black magic spell, one level 6 black magic spell, and if I'm not mistaken, he can only learn one level 6 and 7 white magic spell as well. I'll double check that when I start the game here. Now, the interesting thing to note is that originally the Red Mage was, well, he does have a lower intellect stat than the White Mage and the Black Mage. This was to be to balance out his power, because if he has access to both spells, then it kind of makes sense that he can't cast them quite as well as the White Mage or the Black Mage. However, the intellect stat in this game is bugged. It doesn't actually do anything. So the Red Mage casts the spells just as well as a White Mage or Black Mage, which makes him far more powerful than originally intended. Couple that with his excellent starting defense and his good weapon selection, you have an excellent candidate to put in your second spot to back up your fighter. Unfortunately, while I think the Red Mage is the best overall class in the game for the first half, I think he becomes one of the worst after the class changes. He's still very versatile. Unfortunately, his weapon selection dries up very quickly, as does his armor choices. And, like I said, he eventually gets cut off from the best white magic and black magic spells. So you end up with a character that's good, but kind of sputters and runs out of gas for the end of the game. So, to be honest, the last time I really made a huge run for this game was when I was a kid and made it about halfway through just before the class change. However, I have beaten this game in the Dawn of Souls, PSP, and PS1 versions, and I've used the same party for all those versions. I was thinking about switching up my party for this play, but I decided to stick to what I know. That way, I can not only go through the game the way I'm used to in a very quick and efficient manner, but since it's the party I'm so used to, I can easily direct you, the viewer, in making the appropriate gear decisions, spell decisions, and telling you what's in the game is bugged and what works fine. There's a surprising number of spells and effects that are bugged in this original Nintendo version of the game, and I'll be covering those as we get there. So, to start, I'm going to make a fighter. Always take a fighter in the front line, at least myself. In the newer versions, including Dawn of Souls, you can get away without using a fighter at all because the games are so much easier. However, in this original version, I pretty much recommend a fighter, especially if this is your first time playing, to put him in the first slot. Second, a black belt. I'll be naming the remaining characters. Obviously, the fighter is named after me. The remaining characters will be named after various other Final Fantasy characters. Now, the black belt, I will be naming Yang after the character in Final Fantasy IV. Oops. Sadly, I just realized my button is stuck on turbo, so let me just fake a name here real quick, and then go back. Okay, then we will make a white mage. Go back. White mage will be Rosa from Final Fantasy IV as well. One of my favorite characters. And finally, a black mage who I will name after. Wow, I just realized I'm naming everyone after Final Fantasy IV characters. He will be Tella. Now we got Shin the fighter. He will be our tank. Yang is our black belt. In Final Fantasy IV, he was basically a karate slash martial arts expert, so it fits. Rosa was the white mage in 4, and Tella is basically one of the strongest black mages in the whole series. So this will be our beginning party. It's very well balanced. If this is your first time playing the game, I would certainly recommend 2 melee fighters and 2 spellcasters. A red mage is a perfectly acceptable replacement for a black mage, if that's the type of character you're looking for. The red mage is very flexible and has access to a lot of the spells that make a black mage good. So if you feel like taking a super flexible party, replacing a black mage with a red mage would be quite fine in this group. As for the black belt, if you feel like working with a thief, then that's also quite fine. Just keep in mind you might be grinding out a little more for extra money so you can equip another character. I like having a black belt because aside from his first 2 weapons, he costs literally nothing to equip. And that's a fantastic boon. Not so much in the early game, but later in the game when white magic and black magic spells start costing tens of thousands of gold, it's being able to have one character cost literally nothing to maintain is amazing. But this is our group. We got ourselves a strong tank, a strong attacker with low defense. We got our healer and we got our nuker. It's your basic all-around party, and my personal favorite for this game. This is the party I've used on every version of Final Fantasy to victory, and we are going to get started. And we find ourselves right outside of Corneria Castle. We have very little fanfare. We'll take a look at the menu here. You can see we got 4 dark orbs up in the upper corner. We need to restore those to light to beat the game. It's part of our quest. Each of our characters is holding one, and that's what brought us here. The orbs have a very interesting history, which I'll get into in later videos, is their backstory is enough for me to talk about an entire video in itself. But as you can see, we got our stats here. We start with 400 gold. Shin has his 35 hit points, Yang's 33. Now, those numbers below Rosa and Tella that say magic, those are our spell charges. This first game in the series doesn't use magic points like later games in the series do. Basically, how it works, I don't have any magic yet. We're going to get some in the first town here, but basically, there are 4 spells available for each level. So, there are 4 white magic spells at level 1 and 4 black magic spells at level 1, of which I will be able to choose 3 of them to buy and have equipped on my character. Now, what those spell charges mean is right now I can cast 2 level 1 spells. So, for example, let's say I buy for Rosa Cure, Ruse, and Harm. I would be able to use 2 of those 3 spells whenever I want before resting at an inn or recovering in a house, which is an item I'll be coming across later, to restore those spell charges so you can use them again. Now, part of the successful grinding in this game is going to be hanging around town, so once you've exhausted your spell charges, you can go to an inn and restore them. Unlike later games, there are no items that restore your magic points during battle or in dungeons. The only item that restores your magic points are houses, which cost 3,000 gold later on, and those need to be used on their overworld, but they also have the added benefit of saving your game. Now we have our item screen, which is obviously empty. Magic, we're looking at a whole bunch of nothing here. As you can see, there are 8 levels of spells. Most importantly, weapon and armor will be blank as well, but our status, we can see what our stats are. I'm going to be talking about these a lot more in depth as we gain levels, because a lot of these stats don't mean what you think they may, and a lot of these stats are a lot more important than what they might first appear. But as always, we see our experience points and what we need to level up, and that is just about going to do it for this first tutorial. I'm going to cut the video here before we get into any type of action, and in part 2 we will set upon our quest proper to see what's going on in this kingdom and set out to save the world. We'll hit up the first town, the first dungeon, we'll talk about beginning equipment, beginning spells, why you don't want equipment for certain characters. Oh, we're just going to learn all kinds of stuff. So join me for part 2 when we set upon our journey for real. Thanks for watching the first part, and I will see you next time.